This podcast was recorded on the ancestral lands on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and the Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation.
This is Humans on Rights, a podcast advocating for the education of human rights. Here's your host, Stuart Murray.
If you look up Ralph Bryant on Instagram, you're going to see that he is a writer, a spiritualist, and a mental health advocate. And he has done some interesting things with a Love Notes campaign, which we're going to talk about. But he's done some interesting things to talk about issues, particularly with Black men in Canada. And when we put a human rights lens on what Ralph is involved in, I was thrilled and delighted when he accepted my invitation to come on to this podcast. So, Ralph Bryant, welcome to Humans on Rights.
Yes, Stuart, thank you very much for this opportunity and excited to be here.
So, Ralph, we met at the opening night of Black History Month. Nadia Thompson, who's a personal friend, an amazing community leader, introduced us. But, just at this moment, what I'd love, Ralph, for those people that are listening to this Humans on Right podcast, why don't you introduce yourself and explain what you do?
So my name is Ralph Bryant. I am originally from the United States, but I've been in Canada almost 20 years now and in Winnipeg just under 2 years. I am a writer, filmmaker. I'm a creative, and most important to this conversation, I am a mental health advocate. And I come to that work not only because of my own story, but my family's stories of 3 generations that I know of, from my mom and my mother's father, who all struggled with their mental health issues to the point of needing to be hospitalized. And I kind of represent today 2 separate projects. So one is the Love Notes campaign, which is a way for us, the city, and as we hope to expand beyond Winnipeg, to give words of affirmation and love and support to people all over the city. It's a public arts project that we launched on World Mental Health Day last October, and we're gearing up to do it again this year. And then my other hat is I am a filmmaker that's working on a documentary called On the Verge, which is looking at my own personal mental health story to expand the conversation around mental health in general, but with a specific lens at the plight of mental health outcomes affecting Black men and boys. And the statistics are pretty alarming, and it is something that we need to pay some specific attention to. And you mentioned Nadia Thompson, who is absolutely extraordinary. And I'm also a member of Black History Manitoba. I've been working on events all over the city this month for Black History Month.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Ralph. I appreciate it. And I noticed that, always want to make sure that out of respect, you have Ralph Peter Bryant. Is that your full name that you would like to be called by? When I introduced you as Ralph Bryant. But, if you would like to be known as Ralph Peter Bryant,
yeah,
that's 100% the way it should be.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely Ralph Bryant. That's just a question of being too lazy to take it out of there.
Okay. All right. I love the honesty. We're right into it. Ralph, let's get at it.
Yeah.
Ralph, so just kind of coming back to some of the things that you mentioned in your introduction, you talked about, mental health issues from a family standpoint, from your own standpoint. Can you, I always look at these questions through, again, not a personal lens, although it's up to you because this is your story. But if you look at it from a human rights perspective and, the human rights of people having the ability to see and receive treatment and to be respected with dignity. And can you just maybe share your experience or your family's experience through that lens, please?
So I would say, Stuart, that there is no more important right for us to be focused on than the right to our mental health. And that relates to our individual health and the right to access to mental health resources. So we live in an incredible country with universal health care where our physical bodies, you might have to wait a little while, but you can get everything that's happening from you looked at from your head to your feet. But that is not true for mental health resources. And what anyone knows that has tried to access mental health resources in Canada is that if you're in the public sphere, it takes an incredibly long time. And if you're looking in the private sphere, it's incredibly expensive. So in a lot of cases, people who really need mental health resources are choosing between paying a household bill and accessing therapy. You're going through the public sector. As I said, the wait times are long. And there was a study recently that said that the outcomes for folks of color is almost twice as long as the outcome for non-folks of color. Now, why that is, there are some hypotheses around that. Mostly it's about the resources that are available in neighborhoods of color as opposed to non-neighborhoods of color. And that can be, I think, was as high as 16 months. So let's say you wait your 16 months and you get into the public system. Now you have to deal with what we know is there's been a history of both the US and Canada, actually in the US, so much institutional racism and warehousing and misdiagnosing. The American Psychiatric Association in 2021 actually put out a formal apology acknowledging that it is its history allowing racism to impact how it was treating folks of color, specifically Black folks. And then so even if you access the system, there are these barriers that are preventing you from really getting the care that you need. But if you don't access the system, even just to get over the hurdle of kind of feeling comfortable, there is the tremendous stigma and shame and inability to figure out how to ask for help. And I said earlier that my family, I'm the third generation of my family that was hospitalized. So I was hospitalized in 2018, and I was certainly one of those people that was asking for help, begging for help, looking for resources, and was unable to find them until the point where I broke. And I was someone with resources. I had a great job. I lived in $1 million house. I had 2 cars and a dog and 2 kids. And so I had all of the trappings that one could have, the Canadian dream. And I was still unable to find the resources in order to gain help. But more importantly, I was unable to find the words that would allow someone to be able to support me. And unfortunately, in my case, and I think in the case of too many people, I had to be hospitalized to actually begin the process of receiving the help that I needed.
So, Ralph, very personal. Obviously, respect, thank you, and for sharing. It's always difficult sometimes to hear these stories. They're important to hear. What we're going to get to, by the way, in this conversation is the amazing things you're doing to support other people as you go through this. But perhaps just if you're able to sort of talk about, as you say, here's somebody who's living the Canadian dream. So to meet in a grocery store, nobody would think twice about anything. You'd have a conversation with you. Hey, Ralph, how's it going? Is there some way that you realize that when you used your term, you kind of hit a breaking point?
For sure.
How did you find yourself at that breaking point? What was the genesis, I guess, that caused you to reach that breaking point?
My mental health journey and talking about my mental health challenges began when I was a kid. So I had a absentee father, detached mother, I grew up in the Bronx in New York City, and life was rough. But on top of that, when I was 13, I was sexually assaulted. At that point, everything about my life really changed. And I was no kid, at any age should have to suffer through that. But my surroundings, my community was incapable of really being able to support me at that time. There were really no resources. In fact, what I experienced from some of my immediate family was blame, that I did something to put myself in this position. In fact, my grandmother had said to me at the time that God was punishing me. for being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah. So, Ralph, can I just say, I don't need you to go deeper. I mean, this is traumatic, and I'm not really trying to sort of draw that out.
Sure.
You've created a picture that's pretty clear about some of the trauma. I'm fascinated how did you find your strength through all of that?
Well, I think that I just want to put a quote. I think it's important sometimes we have these conversations around mental health and they're a little too clever. That, like we know we need to change the stigma and we know that people experience trauma. But I think the more we're able to normalize talking about it, the more we're able to get closer to outcomes.
Totally fair. Really, I had a very difficult upbringing. You've shared that. Very unfair upbringing. You've shared that. And if there's more you would like to say, I just want to, because when we get to the Ralph Bryant that I met, a month ago, this vibrant, this incredibly energetic, this person who just exuded, sort of a sense of confidence of who you were and what you're about. And, and I went onto your social sites to see the amazing work that you're doing. And we're going to, as I said earlier, we're going to talk about that because that's really what I want to get to. But you've had so much trauma, you survived. Something allowed you to survive, some inner strength, something that allowed Ralph Bryant to get to where you are today. Can you share that?
I think I developed and maybe have always had a sense of resiliency. I think that I am stronger than maybe I gave myself credit for. And despite my childhood trauma, I've had a successful career. I went to university. I worked for the National Basketball Association. I've worked on political campaigns. I've worked for Fortune 500 companies. I've done a lot of things. And actually, I think that was the thing that was so kind of jarring about my mental health challenge when I started to struggle 6 years ago was that I think my way through it, that I could, just kind of problem solve my way through it. And I didn't need to ask for help. And I learned that that's not the way to go. It wasn't a helpful strategy for me. And so when I got out of the hospital, I wanted to take the same amount of focus and attention and care that made me successful at work and put it to figuring out my own personal story and my narrative around mental health. And as I did that, I recognized that how important it is that we talk about these issues openly and that to be focused on my mental health journey and not focused on how we uplift and create safe spaces for everyone. It just became my mission and my purpose. And I think that it's something that I am always focused on, and it is a daily kind of struggle. But I know that when I look at the person that, or more importantly, we'll talk about the documentary. The documentary is rooted in a series of audio recordings that I took before I was hospitalized and during my hospitalization. And when I listen back to those audio recordings as we're preparing for the project, there is a part of that person that I almost don't even recognize and that I almost can't, it sounds like me, but it isn't me. It almost feels like. So I know that. And so when looking at that person today, I'm really able to see how far I've come. And I think that it is to not figure out how to give back, to not figure out how to support others along their journey. I'm also a father of 2 teenage boys, and it is incredibly important to me that they have the tools and the resources so that hopefully they never have to use them. But I want them to have the tools and resources that I didn't have and the resiliency that they will need to go forth in the world as, young Black men.
For sure. And so let's pivot on that for a second, Ralph. So 2 young boys,
Not so young anymore. If I called them young, they might be mad at me. So
I'm a father and I'm a grandfather. So, but my two daughters will always be young to me, even though they're wonderful mothers and professionals in their field. But your boys then, young men, are they in the city? Are they living in the city? Are they in Winnipeg, or what sorts of things are they doing?
they are still in Ontario. I go back and forth every 6 weeks or so. So I'm going back in a few weeks. And they are incredible. They are honor roll students. And my youngest son is playing for Team Canada lacrosse. He's 14. And my oldest son, who's about to be 16, was on the team that won the Canada National Championships in soccer.
Wow.
So they are truly incredible human beings. And I know that they're going to do great things in the world.
Sounds like they've done great things already, Ralph. It's pretty amazing, right? Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So, Ralph, coming back to, when you started to record, you recorded, as you say, audio recordings.
Yeah.
And you obviously started this project before you were hospitalized, and you have obviously continued on it post being out of the hospital. Let's go back to before you were hospitalized. What were you trying to record? What was your purpose for recording? What were you working on? What was the project?
I wish I could remember specifically the light bulb that made me say to, hit record. I know that I was called to do it. And in some ways, it feels like I was called to do it, knowing that at some point I was going to be making a documentary about mental health. There are some audio recordings of the day before I was hospitalized that alludes to that, which is a little bit creepy and interesting. And I thought that I was about to die. And I thought that these recordings would be a way to put people in my mind as I was no longer going to be here. And I had been working on a podcast called Black Fathers Matter at the time. And so I was used to being in front of a mic. And so I had a pretty nice microphone sitting next to me in my basement. And so I just, pressed record and got what I got. I know that there was something that kind of motivated me to do that. But the only thing I can say today is that I know that I was called to do it. And I think it's a great opportunity. It leaves us with a great opportunity to really hear someone in psychosis, and someone who was struggling, and also someone who then, kind of goes into the hospital, and what that experience feels like in, listening to it as like a play-by-play.
Sure. So this is kind of the project. And am I right? Is it on the Verge? Is that the title of this project, On the Verge?
Yeah.
So Ralph, when you look at this project, I think one of the chapters of this documentary you're working on is, as you just said, it's about you. It's about your personal journey.
Yeah.
And how has that been for you to kind of put that down in an audio file? How has that felt for you?
It's both cathartic and disturbing. And I don't mean disturbing in a negative way necessarily. It's just so interesting. I've done a bunch of creative things. And so from a creative lens, it feels very ripe with possibility and opportunity. So when I take myself kind of out of it, and I'm working with a small team on the project. And so when I take myself out of it, and we're just like having a meeting about what files get used and at what point, I'm excited by the possibility to have the project grounded in that audio. Sometimes though, when I'm listening to it, listen to them enough that I'm a bit detached. But when we decided to do this last year, and I was first listening to them, it took me a long time to kind of work up the courage to listen. And I wanted to listen to them first before I asked anyone else to listen to them. And so it was difficult, but important.
That may change, but at this point, the working title is On the Verge.
Yeah.
And so because that has a lot of different connotations. On the verge of what?
It's actually something that I say in one of the audio recordings. And it actually comes from it's not that old, but a movie in the, I don't know, late 90s, Spanish movie called Woman on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown. And that was one of the first foreign language films that I'd ever seen. And Almodovar, who's the director, is one of my favorite directors. And although I haven't seen it since, I somehow and I think it's one of the best movie titles ever. And so in one of the audio recordings, I'm talking about what's happening to me. And I say that I am a man on the verge of a nervous breakthrough. And so the original title of the project was Man on the Verge of a Nervous Breakthrough. And I just shortened it to On the Verge.
Thanks for sharing that, because what I love about it is it could be, and I just, again, love how you've kind of positioned on the verge of a breakthrough. A lot of times people would say on the verge of a breakdown.
Right.
Right. And so the breakthrough, I mean, that's the positive. That's the moving forward. That's my interpretation.
Yeah.
So let's just, kind of talk a little bit about where you're at with On the Verge. And then I want to talk about your Love Notes campaign.
We're in pre-production on the project. We're organizing audio files, and before we shoot, we're going to do a series of community connections around making sure that we have the greatest impact of this project and bring other people in. I mean, my story is kind of the anchor of this, but this is really a broader conversation about how do we create a resilient mental health community that serves all of us. So we have our rough script, but we have a series of meetings this month and in March where with community folks and throughout the city and some outside of the city that are working in mental health spaces, working in healthcare, and asking them to kind of laying out our case for the script, but then gaining their investment in the project, which in the short term, that feedback will inform our script. But in the long term, what it will allow us to do is when we're ready to actually are doing screenings, our kind of gift back to those community organizations is to ask them to do a screening of the project with their constituency, and both the screening and a Q&A, so that we are really looking at how we broaden the impact of the project. I recently completed a mentorship with a great organization called Story Money Impact that is focused on helping documentary filmmakers to amplify the impact. We often think about films that, you make a film, it'll go to festivals and it'll go, maybe if you're lucky, it'll end up in broadcast. And we want those things too. But more importantly, our goal is to do 100 screenings in community in Winnipeg and in Toronto and in New York City, so that we are creating small, intimate spaces where you can not only watch the film, but also, and talk about the film, but also access mental health resources on the spot.
Okay. So Ralph, let me just ask you, when you talk about you'd like this to go back to these communities and it be shared with their constituency, define, if you can, who is the constituency?
We are naturally, On the Verge will resonate with folks working in the mental health spaces, folks that are working in healthcare, and then organizations that are working in Black communities. I think there's also a great opportunity for us to rethink about, organize how we have these conversations in schools, where we will have a teacher's guide the teachers can use, with their students in screenings, in school screenings, so smaller screenings, organizations that are interested in working in unique organizations that serve people of color, and recognizing that, the messages will have to be tweaked a little bit because what the needs of Black men are different from the needs of Black women, and the needs of queer folks are unique, and we need to be mindful. And so we'll be focused on universal themes, but then recognize that we'll create some targeted question and answers and reference material to support a diverse set of populations that will watch the project.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you for that, Ralph. When I first met you and we chatted and I talked about this human rights podcast, and you talked about some of the research you shared with me. And one of the pieces you shared was that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the suicide rate between Black men and Black women is 4 times greater for Black men. Am I right with that?
Yeah.
That's what the research shows?
So that was a study that was done in the US. And to layer on top of that, the suicide rates in Canada of Black youth are rising faster than any other population in the country. So between those two, Black men are more likely to unalive themselves, and Black young people are rates of suicide skyrocketing. So we've got it on kind of both sides of the landscape that we need to be mindful of.
Yeah, that's shocking. I mean, it's so a bit disturbing. I mean, one is suicide, ideation or suicide attempts, and those that do commit suicide. I mean, it's just very difficult. And so, to see those numbers, the way they are, the number thing is that's important to share, as hard it is and difficult as it is to hear those facts. It's important to share. But of course, the next thing is, what's being done about it?
I think there's a lot of interest in my project, which is, affirming and great. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the work that Dr. Warren Clark is doing, University of Manitoba with Afro-Caribbean Mentorship Program, Barbershop Talk series. So I think that there are people that are looking at this from as many different lenses as can be. So that's a great start. And we need to continue to figure out how we, fund and support projects like that, and then ensure that all, diverse communities have similar projects in which those that are most at risk and those that are facing the stigma the most are able to access, the resources that they will need in order to overcome that stigma and need the help that they.
And even to let them know that there are resources available, right? I mean, all of that information. So that's fantastic. So Ralph, let's kind of shift to your Love Notes campaign. You launched that, I think, on Mental Health Awareness Day. Let's get into it. What's the campaign about? Where did you launch it? And what did it look like when you first started it?
As I said, I'm in Winnipeg for almost 2 years. And so originally I started the Love Notes campaign as a way for me to get to learn the city. And I was making handwritten notes. My handwriting is awful, but I was making handwritten notes, and I was riding my bike and posting them, wherever I could, each time in a different neighborhood.
In public spaces.
In public spaces, yeah. So on telephone poles and on coffee shops, and with no call to action, nothing other than a way for me to give a little love back in the city. I think also it was during the time that I was really beginning to work on the documentary. And I wanted to do something. At that point, it was very, very intense. And so I wanted to do something that balanced out that intensity by giving something back and doing something that was more fun, more uplifting. And the idea of the Love Notes came. So originally I was just, as I said, doing them by hand. And the response was so great. Like, it was sparked conversations with people that I probably would not have met otherwise. I got some great responses on people who found me on social media and wanted to know more, people who wanted to, receive copies of them. That felt like an opportunity to expand that on a little bit of a larger level when World Mental Health Day was coming, and to get my handwriting out of it so people could actually read them. A couple months before, we did a call to action to artists both in Winnipeg and outside of Winnipeg, and to individuals to ask them to just send us words of affirmation. We ended up with 200, and the goal was that we were going to put up 150 of them from one end of the city to the other, which would coincide with Winnipeg's 150th anniversary. And that was incredible. It was long because we put them all up in 24 hours, and we literally went from one side of the perimeter to the other, and from the north Kildonan to South Osborne, and with the goal of making sure that there were love notes in each of the kind of 15 major communities in Winnipeg. And it was such a powerful experience because we had a small group of volunteers that supported putting them up. And the conversations that we had with people, they were prettier. We did them during the day. It was during a work day. So we started putting them up during morning rush hour. So people were moving and grooving throughout the city. And so the reactions were really powerful. And we got some cool media coverage out of it. Has really galvanized us to want to think about how we do it again and do it better, but bring more people into the mix, and get more people talking about mental health, but from a place of positivity and from a place of affirmations and from a place of supporting each other and caring for each other. And so it's very exciting.
So obviously I saw some of the coverage you got in the local media, which is super positive, amazing. But just can you share, Ralph, is there any one or two anecdotes you could share of things that happened kind of organically as you were doing this and somebody said something, or, you got a reaction from somebody? Share that if you don't mind, please.
Yeah. So my friend, Veronica, who's our chief elf, and I were we did a small wall of under the Osborne Street bus station, the underpass. And there was a guy that came up. We were there for longer than we should have been, because what we didn't know is that during rush hour, people are walking. So at one point, that was the place where we stood there for 10 minutes because people wanted to talk about them. And there was a guy that he walked past us, said good morning, but he was kind of paying attention to what we're doing. And then he came back and he was welled up a little bit. And he said to Veronica and I, he was like, I've had the worst day already. It's 8:00 in the morning. And just seeing one of the signs said, it's okay to not be okay. And he's like, I'm not okay today. So just seeing that you guys put that there, it's going to change how I feel about myself for the rest of the day. And then that sparked a conversation where I was like, so what's going on? Why are you not feeling okay? He and I talked, we kind of took a couple steps away while Veronica was continuing to put the rest of the posters up. And to not go into details, obviously, but I gave him a hug after he shared with what was going on with him. And then he went on his way and I went on my way. And I was trying to, at that moment, I was, done a bunch of mental health first aid training. So I was really able to hold space for him. But then after he left, I broke down because you don't always know the impact that you're going to have. And even though every once in a while still, as I'm walking around, I see an old love note that was put up, but I know that those love notes had an impact on people. In that case, that gentleman, that impact was big. but I'm sure that there were, responses from folks big and small. We had 5 or 6 folks direct message me to ask me to actually send them the love notes electronically, and was really impactful and really powerful.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. And, what a great initiative. And, doesn't it really sort of speak volumes about simplicity and thoughtfulness are sort of two powerful messages. And I think the Love Notes campaign, it's going to sort of organically find a real sense of growth, I'm sure, Ralph, in next year. And as more people hear about it and as you get more people involved, and, maybe you'll step aside and let somebody else with maybe a little bit of handwriting kind of write some of the posters. So it's all good.
So this year, we want to take that idea a little bit further. And we're just at the beginnings of connecting with arts organizations throughout the city and asking them to partner with us by hosting what are called love-ins, which are basically like inviting people to come and either write a word of affirmation that will become a love note, or design love notes themselves. So we love to have a diversity of people from all over the city, and love notes look and feel different. Our goal is to have one of those love-ins in each of the 15 communities of Winnipeg again, so that communities can really take ownership, determine where they should go, and based on what they know about their specific neighborhoods, and really bring people in to the process a little bit more. And I think, because this is a public arts initiative, it will also allow us to celebrate the amazing arts organizations that there are in the city.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I love the idea, and whatever we can do through our Humans on Rights social to promote it, Ralph, we'd be delighted. It would be amazing. Listen, as the kind of the chapter of our conversation starts to draw to a close, let me just ask you that somebody who's listening to this podcast and wanted to get involved, whether it's the Love Notes campaign or whether it's assisting on or helping with respect to your documentary, The Verge, is there a way that they can get involved, or is there some way they can go to a site to get involved? Or what advice would you give to anybody listening to say, this resonates with me, I'd like to make a difference?
Yeah. So they can absolutely reach out to me at my Instagram feed is Ralph_Bryant. My email address is ralphbryantwriter@gmail.com. We will absolutely need volunteers for the Love Notes project. Our goal is to this year have a community lead in each of those 15 neighborhoods that will help make sure that the post can manage the love-ins and make sure that the posters go up on the day. So we'll be raising some funds for that, and would love it if any of your listeners would like to take on some of those community lead projects positions. And then with the documentary, we are, again, same places where people can reach me. The best thing that people could do at this point is to connect to support by hosting a screening. Once we get to that point, we're raising money for the documentary as well. And if it's someone that has a community organization or works at a school or a university that would like to be more involved by bringing the project into their spaces, that would be absolutely amazing.
That's fantastic. Again, thanks for sharing all of that, Ralph. Typically, kind of the last throw to you as a guest, is there anything I didn't ask you that you wanted to have a chance to talk about on this podcast?
I thought you did a great job asking me everything, but I think the thing that I would say that is most important is the first line of defense for mental health isn't the hospitals or the therapists or the institutions that do this work. It is your friends and your family and your immediate community. And so if you have someone in your kind of circle that is, you're not sure how they're doing, or they've expressed to you that they're struggling a little bit, it's imperative that you check in and be a presence, even if they get annoyed at you, even if they say everything is fine, because at some point they will, maybe be ready to open up. It takes a little bit of time sometimes for people to get to that place, but we need to be our brothers and sisters keeper when it comes to mental health so that we can stop people from getting past that point. So, let's look out for each other. Let's support each other and let's be there for each other.
Can't think of a better way to wrap up this conversation. Ralph Bryant, you've done amazing work. You continue to do amazing work. Your journey is quite spectacular. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for being a guest on Humans on Rights.
Yeah, I appreciate you, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to Humans on Rights. A transcript of this episode is available by clicking the link in the show notes of this episode. Humans on Rights is recorded and hosted by Stuart Murray. Social media marketing by Buffy Davey. Music by Doug Edmond. For more, go to humanrightshub.ca.
Produced and distributed by the Sound Off Media Company.